At my graduation, I remember scanning the crowd, heart pounding, searching for my parents' faces. I had imagined that moment for years. The applause, their smiles, maybe even pride in their eyes. When I finally spotted them, they weren't even looking at me. My sister stood next to them, laughing, dressed like she was the one graduating. As I walked across the stage, diploma in hand, I heard scattered claps, but not theirs. After the ceremony, we gathered for a small family dinner. I thought maybe, just maybe, that's when they'd say something. Instead, my mom raised her glass and smiled at my sister. "She's always been the brilliant one," she said. "We just know she's going to do something big." Everyone nodded. Then my dad looked at me, shrugged slightly, and added, "You did okay. I mean, you've always been kind of average." Average. That word didn't just land, it stayed. It echoed in my chest while everyone kept talking like nothing had happened. I smiled. I even nodded. Years of being overlooked had trained me well. But what they didn't know, what no one at that table knew, was that I had already signed an offer letter 2 weeks before. Not just any job. A position at a company they had bragged about for years, the same one my sister had applied to 3 times and never got into. I hadn't told them. Not because I wasn't proud, but because, deep down, I knew this moment would come. So I reached into my bag, pulled out the envelope, and placed it gently on the table. "I guess average was enough," I said quietly. The room went silent. My sister's smile faded first. Then my dad leaned forward, reading the letter twice. My mom didn't say a word. For the first time in my life, no one interrupted me. No one corrected me. No one compared me. They just stared. And, in that silence, I finally felt seen. My dad cleared his throat first, still holding the letter like it might disappear if he blinked. This is real?" he asked. I nodded. "Signed 2 weeks ago." My sister let out a small, forced laugh. "Wow, that's unexpected." Unexpected. I almost smiled at that. For years, I had been predictable to them. The quiet one. The safe one. The one who wouldn't outshine anyone. "I didn't think you were even applying there," my mom said, her voice softer now. "I wasn't telling anyone," I replied. "I wanted to make sure I could do it, without being compared first." That hit harder than anything else I'd said. Silence again, but this time, it felt different. Heavier. Uncomfortable. My dad set the letter down carefully. "Why didn't you come to us? We could have helped." I looked at him, really looked this time. "Helped," I repeated. "Like when you helped me choose my major. Or when you told me not to aim too high, because that's more her thing?" He didn't answer. My sister shifted in her chair, crossing her arms. "Okay, you don't have to make this a big deal." I turned to her, not angry, just done. "It's been a big deal my whole life," I said calmly. No raised voice. No tears. Just truth. For the first time, she didn't have anything to say back. My mom reached for her glass, but didn't drink. "We didn't realize you felt this way." That almost made me laugh, but I held it in. "You didn't realize," I said slowly, "because you never looked." That was it. No yelling. No dramatic exit. I simply stood up, grabbed my bag, and paused for a second. "I'm not average," I added. I just stopped trying to prove it to people who had already decided I was. Then I walked away. Behind me, no one called my name. But for the first time in my life, I didn't need them to. Outside, the air felt different. Quieter. Lighter. I didn't rush to the car. I just stood there for a moment, holding my diploma in one hand, and everything I had held in for years finally gone. My phone buzzed. A message from my mom. "Can we talk?" I stared at it, thumb hovering over the screen. For so long, that was all I wanted, for them to want to talk, to understand, to see me. But now it didn't feel urgent anymore. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. Not out of anger. Just clarity. The next few weeks moved fast. New city. New apartment. New job. At work, no one knew me as the average one. They didn't know my sister. They didn't compare. They just listened. And for the first time, when I spoke in meetings, people nodded, took notes, asked for my opinion. My manager pulled me aside one day after a presentation. That was impressive, she said. You have a sharp mind. Don't hold back. Don't hold back. I almost didn't know how to respond to that. Back home, things were different. My parents started calling more. Not constantly. Not perfectly. But differently. They asked about my work, my apartment, my life. They listened longer than they used to. And my sister? She stopped making those little comments. The subtle ones. The ones that used to shrink me. The dynamic had shifted, and everyone felt it. Months later, I went back for a family dinner. Same table. Same house. But not the same version of me. This time when I walked in, my dad stood up. Hey, he said, almost unsure. We've been hearing a lot about you. I raised an eyebrow slightly. Good things, I hope. He gave a small smile. Yeah, good things. During dinner, there were no comparisons. No backhanded compliments. Just conversation. At one point, my mom looked at me and said quietly, "We're proud of you." Simple words. Late. But real. I nodded, not needing anything more. Because the truth was, I hadn't proven anything to them. I had proven it to myself. And that changed everything. Time passed, and something subtle began to happen. Not with them. With me. I stopped replaying that night in my head. Stopped wondering what I could have said better, or how I should have acted. Because for the first time, I didn't leave a moment feeling small. About a year later, I got promoted. It wasn't dramatic. No big announcement. Just a quiet meeting, a handshake, and a new title that once felt completely out of reach. But this time, I did something different. I didn't keep it to myself. I went home again. Same house. Same table. But this time, I wasn't hoping to be seen. I already was. I got promoted, I said casually as we sat down. My mom's eyes widened. Already. My dad smiled, proud, but also almost surprised at himself for being proud. That's really impressive, he said. No hesitation. No comparison. Just that. My sister looked at me for a second longer than usual, then nodded. That's big, she said. Congrats. And there was no edge to it. No competition. Just acknowledgement. Later that night, as I was about to leave, my dad stopped me near the door. I owe you an apology, he said. I didn't respond right away. I shouldn't have called you average, he continued. That was wrong. And unfair. I studied his face. He meant it. I believed you, I said quietly. For a long time, that part seemed to hit him the hardest. I know, he replied. And I'm sorry for that too. I nodded. And for the first time, I let that chapter close without needing anything more. On the drive back, I realized something I hadn't fully put into words before. They didn't change first. I did. I stopped accepting the role they gave me. Stopped shrinking to fit their expectations. And once I did that, everything around me had no choice but to adjust. I still go back sometimes. We still sit at that same table. But now, when I speak, people listen. Not because I proved them wrong, but because I finally stopped believing they were right. A few months later, something happened I hadn't expected. It was my grandmother's birthday. The whole family was there, loud, crowded, familiar in that way that used to make me feel invisible. I almost didn't go, but something told me this time would be different. At one point, my grandmother asked everyone to sit down. I want to say something, she said, her voice gentle but firm. The room slowly quieted. She looked around, then her eyes landed on me. You know, she began, for years, I watched this family celebrate the loudest voice in a room. A small, awkward chuckle moved through the table. But the strongest one, she continued, was always the quietest. No one laughed this time. My chest tightened. I saw how hard you worked, she said, still looking at me, even when no one else did. I swallowed. My parents shifted in their seats. And I'm proud of the person you became not because of what you achieved, she added softly, but because of who you chose to be despite everything. That almost broke me. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. I wasn't planning to do this today, she said, but I think it's time. She handed it to me. I hesitated before opening it, but when I did, My hands actually trembled. Inside was a letter and a document. Property papers. A small house. Her house. Left to me. The room exploded. What? My sister said, sitting up straighter. Grandma, are you serious? My mom added, stunned. My dad didn't say anything, but his silence was loud. My grandmother didn't look at them. She looked at me. I don't reward noise, she said calmly. I reward consistency, integrity, heart. No one argued after that, because deep down they knew. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I just closed the envelope carefully and held it in my lap, not because of what it was worth, but because, for the first time, someone had seen everything and chose me anyway. Later that night, as I was leaving, my sister stopped me outside. Do you think you deserved that? She asked. Not aggressively, just honestly. I looked at her for a moment. Then I said, I stopped asking that question a long time ago. She didn't respond, but she didn't argue either. As I drove away, I realized something final. This was never about proving them wrong, or winning, or finally being better. It was about no longer needing permission to believe in myself. And now, even if no one had ever clapped, even if no one had ever said they were proud, I would have still made it here, because I was never average. I was just surrounded by people who couldn't see clearly. And once I stepped out of that, everything came into focus. A few weeks later, I went back to the house. Not for a dinner, not for a celebration, just to see it. My grandmother's house. It looked smaller than I remembered. The paint was slightly faded, the garden a little overgrown, but the moment I stepped inside, something settled in my chest. Peace. Real peace. Not the kind you fight for. The kind that's just there. I walked through each room slowly. The kitchen, where she used to hum while cooking. The living room, where she'd sit quietly, observing everything no one else noticed. And then I realized something that made me stop in the middle of the hallway. She had always seen me, even back then, when I thought no one did. A few days later, I decided not to sell the house. Everyone assumed I would. My parents even asked cautiously, "What are you planning to do with it?" "I'm keeping it," I said. They looked surprised. "Why?" my dad asked. I thought about it for a second. Because it's the first place I've ever felt like I didn't have to prove anything to exist. He didn't have a response for that. Over time, that house became more than just a gift. It became my space, my reset. On weekends, I'd go there, sit by the window, work, think, breathe. No comparisons. No expectations. Just me. One afternoon, my sister showed up, unannounced. I opened the door, a little confused. "Hey," she said, awkwardly. "Can I come in?" I hesitated for a second, then stepped aside. We sat in the living room, the same one where our grandmother used to sit. "This place feels different," she said, looking around. "It always was," I replied. She nodded slowly. Then, after a long pause, she said something I never expected to hear. "I think I liked being the favorite because it meant I didn't have to try as hard." I didn't interrupt. "But now," she continued, "it just feels like I don't know who I." She stared at the floor for a second, searching for the words. "Like I don't know who I am without that," she finally finished. The room went quiet. I didn't rush to respond. For years, I had wanted her to feel what I felt, to understand the weight of being overlooked. But now that she was sitting there, not as the favorite, but just as a person, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt human. "I don't think you ever needed that," I said calmly. "You just got used to it." She let out a small breath, almost like relief. "Yeah," she admitted. "I think I did." We sat there a little longer, not saying much. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was new. No roles. No competition. No invisible scoreboard between us. Before leaving, she paused at the door. "Do you think it's too late for me to figure things out on my own?" she asked. I shook my head. "No," I said. "But it might be harder." She gave a small smile. "Fair." Then she added, a little quieter, "I'm proud of you, by the way." I looked at her, not surprised, but aware of how much that moment mattered.
Thanks, I said.
And this time I believed it. After she left, I stayed by the window for a while. The same window my grandmother used to sit by, watching, understanding, saying little but seeing everything. And that's when it fully sank in. This wasn't just my ending. It was a shift. In me, in my family, in the story we had all been stuck in for years. I was never the average one. I was the one who had to grow without validation. The one who had to build confidence in silence. The one who learned how to stand without applause. And in the end, that became my greatest advantage. Because when everything finally got quiet, when the comparison stopped, when the roles disappeared, I didn't have to find myself. I already had. That night, as the sun slowly disappeared behind the trees, I stayed there longer than usual. Not thinking, not planning, just existing. For so many years, my life had felt like a reaction. Reacting to their expectations. Reacting to their words. Reacting to a version of myself they had already decided on.
But now,
there was nothing to react to, only something to build. A few days later, I made a decision. I turned my grandmother's house into something more. Not just a place for me, but a place for people like me. People who had been overlooked. People who had been called not enough. People who had learned to grow quietly. I started small. Weekend gatherings. Open conversations. A space where no one had to prove their worth before speaking. At first, it was just a few people. Then more. And more. One evening, during one of those gatherings, someone shared something that hit me harder than I expected. I've always felt like I was living in someone else's shadow, they said. The room went quiet. I recognized that feeling instantly. I had lived there for years. I smiled slightly and said, sometimes the shadow isn't because you're smaller. It's just because the light was never pointed at you. They looked at me like something had just clicked. And in that moment, I understood something deeper. Everything I went through, every dismissal, every comparison, every time I was called average. It didn't just shape me, it gave me something I could now give to others. Months later, my parents visited the house for the first time. They walked in slowly, observing everything. The people, the conversations, the atmosphere. This is yours? My mom asked, almost in disbelief. I nodded. My dad looked around, then at me. You built this? He asked. Yes, I said simply. He took a breath, like he was about to say something important, but instead, he just nodded. This time, he didn't need to say he was proud. I could see it. Before they left, my mom hugged me a little tighter than usual. We didn't understand before, she whispered. I know, I replied. And I meant it. That night, after everyone was gone, I sat in the same chair my grandmother used to sit in. The house was quiet again. But it wasn't empty. It was full of stories, of voices, of people finally being seen, just like I had been. And as I looked around, I realized something that felt like the true ending of everything that had started years ago. I didn't just walk away from being the average one. I rewrote what that even meant, because in the end, I wasn't overlooked. I was being prepared for a life where I wouldn't need approval, only purpose. And now, I finally had both. And yet there was one last moment I didn't expect. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. No gathering, no event, no audience. Just me, sitting at the kitchen table, going through some old boxes my grandmother had left behind. Photos, letters, small things that most people would probably throw away. But then, I found something different. A sealed envelope, with my name on it. My hand slowed as I picked it up. The handwriting was hers. Careful. Familiar. I opened it gently. Inside was a short letter. If you're reading this, it means you finally found your way back here. I felt my chest tighten. I always knew you would struggle in a house where people only saw what was loud. A small pause. But I also knew something they didn't. You were never meant to compete. You were meant to become. I sat down slowly. One day, they will see you differently. Not because you changed, but because you stopped waiting for them to understand you. My eyes blurred slightly. And when that day comes, Don't carry the past with you. You won't need it anymore. There was one last line. You were never average. You were just early in your becoming. I didn't move for a long time. The house was completely silent, but it didn't feel empty. It felt full circle. All those years, all those moments I thought defined me, they didn't. They were just chapters. Necessary ones, but not permanent. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Not hidden, not stored away, just kept. That evening, as the light filled the room again, I caught my reflection in the window. And for the first time, I didn't see who I used to be, or who they thought I was. I just saw me.
Whole. Certain.
Enough. And that was the quiet truth behind everything. I didn't win. I didn't prove them wrong. I didn't become better than anyone. I simply became someone who no longer needed to be compared. And in that, I found something far greater than validation. I found freedom.